Okay, so let's get started. So the first thing I'd like to do before I start a new project is go ahead and do a reset on Modo, or actually go up to the tab here and double click on the tab, and that's going to kind of restore my UI to the baseline version. That's in case I have anything left over from a previous project or a previous scene that I don't want carried over into this new scene. So like I said earlier, this is going to be a box modeling project. So the first thing we need to do is build a box. It's going to represent the volume of the model that we're building. So I'm going to click here to Unit Primitives, and I'm going to open the Properties panel, Tool Properties, and drag that out so it pins there. Now the position of this cube I want to be 0, so I'm going to click on these three things, these three little gang buttons on the side here one time, so that it says equals, and hit 0, hit the tab key, and then they're all at 0. Now for as far as the size goes, this is going to be roughly a size 10 last, so the dimensions are going to be in, I'm going to put them in centimeters here. And if you don't have your units set to meters and centimeters, you will have to type in cm after each one of the parameters that you put in. So I'll just start off here. See, x I think is 9.7 centimeters. And you do have to type lowercase. If you hit uppercase, then it defaults to meters. Y, I believe, is 11.5 centimeters. I'm just going to hit the tab because I already have centimeters set up in my units. And Z is going to be 27 centimeters, and I'll hit the tab. And that's all we need to do. I'm just going to hit the apply button, and there is our volume that we are going to model. All right. So the next thing we need to do is add some backdrop images in the viewport to act as guides for us so we can model our shoe to. As you probably already know by now, I've prepared the backdrop images for you. So I'm just going to click on this bar right at the top to expose these buttons. We're just going to move to the right to click on that button right there to open up the Clips browser panel. Now I'll just go up to the little drop-down panel at the top, click on that and go to Load Image. And it's going to bring up a requester for me. Now the first thing I'm going to do is load in this last side view here. And now I'm going to go up to the Scenes panel, the little drop-down arrow right there, and go to Add Backdrop Item. Now, by default, the backdrop item that it adds is always a meter square, and it's projected from the front. And in our case, we want it to project from the side, and it'll be the right side for us. And we add an image to that by just clicking on that little button, and it brings up the file browser. And there we go. Now, as you can see, Modo has resized the backdrop item to fit the image because it assumes that the image size is 1 centimeter per pixel. Now, as you can see, that makes for a very large backdrop item. Now I can try to adjust the pixel scale here to fit the side of the box, but I'm just guessing at that point. Or if I actually know the parameters, I can put them up in the top scale area. But the easiest thing to do would be to have the backdrop size snap to the size of the box. Well, we can do that quite easily by unchecking Keep Aspect, go down to Use Uniform Size, and then select Auto Fit. And there it is. Now let's go ahead and add another backdrop, but this time for the top-down view. And to do this, we're simply going to open up a file window and navigate over to where our images are stored. And then just grab an image and just drag it and drop it on top of the viewport. And there you go. We've automatically created a backdrop item. However, by default, Modo creates a front-facing backdrop item, so we just need to change that to a top, and that's it. Now we'll just use the same auto fit feature, uncheck that, check that one, and click auto fit, and we're there. As you can see, there's a slight discrepancy in the direction that the top image is facing, but that's an easy fix. But before we do that, let's just go ahead and add one more image for our backdrop items. And this time I'm going to use the front view and select that. And now go to add a new backdrop item. Now just click on the images button there and select the front view, and we're done. Go ahead and use the auto sizing feature as we did before. And there we go. Now, since the front and the top images are facing the correct direction, I'm just going to flip the side image. So all we have to do is go down to these projection parameters and just click on flip, and that's all you have to do. Now, as you can see, Modo gives you a lot of controls over the viewability of a less than ideal backdrop image. For example, we can invert the image. We can blend it if it needs to be a little more anti-aliased around the edges, around fine lines and such. We can also adjust the contrast. We can increase the contrast, decrease the contrast as needed. Just use those sliders or input a number. We can also decrease or increase the brightness if you want to view your image as a silhouette. Now that we have all our backdrop items in place and our images attached to them, we want to be sure we name them correctly because it's very, very confusing to have everything called backdrop item and not know what's what. Now I'm just going to do a little housekeeping here and move the camera to the top of the item list, and I'm going to shift select all of my backdrop items and hit Control G. And that's going to group them into a folder. And we want to be sure and name that folder before we forget. And we'll simply call this backdrops. This way, if they're in a group, I can turn them all on and off at the same time, or open the group folder and turn them on and off individually. So there we go. So you'll notice right off the bat that there is a little bit of a problem here. There's a few things. One, I can't see through these images to my object, and I can't see through my object to the images. So that may be a little problematic for us. So what I'm going to do is set some viewport parameters. So let me close the Clips Images panel, and I'll clip on that little cog to bring up the viewport properties, or you can hit the O key, it'll do the same thing. Now, in order to see through these backdrop images in perspective view, and the reason I say perspective view is because it is different in perspective view than it is orthographic. Now if I click on overlay drawing at the top there, you can see through it. Now topology mode will also work, but I think overlay drawing works a little bit better because it doesn't change the gamma of the image as much. So now we have the images on our backdrop items nicely transparent. We can see through them to the work plane grid below. We can also see our model behind it, and we can see through them to the other images for the backdrop items. However, there is another setting we need to take care of here. And let's go up to an orthographic view. Let's go to top view, and guess what? You cannot see any of the backdrop item images. What's going on here? So let's go ahead and click on overlay for the background imagery. And now we can see our images in orthographic view. One last thing I wanted to do is take the top view, or excuse me, the top backdrop item and move it to the bottom of the model, to the ground plane as it were, and there we go. Now we're set up. So one last thing I want to do for the viewport setup is to turn off the ground plane grid, and I do this because it just adds a lot of visual noise to the scene when you're working with backdrops. So I'm just going to hit the Control 1, select Toggle Grid Work Plane at the bottom there of that pie pop-up menu, and we are ready to rock. But as always, don't forget to save your work.